They thought that they could get away with it. I am awestruck at this point. Mind's Eye has to be one of the worst, one of the most hilariously bad video game releases that I have ever seen. We're talking about a game that was entirely sold off of the prestige of their former employer. 450 developers. They promised the world only to deliver absolute garbage for $60. $30 extra if you guys want to get your hands on the deluxe pass. Might not want to miss out on that. Mind's Eye is just bad. Conceptually, there are actually some really cool things here, but everything put in motion makes this game feel like it's an early access version or an alpha version of a game, but that is not how this game is being sold as, even though they essentially have an early access roadmap. You can't make this up. Look, I can tell that a few people worked really hard on this game. Genuinely, I can. But those are rare moments, flashes in the pan, in a series of red flags that are leading directly to this studio's closure in the next couple of months, if not weeks, to be honest with you. I mean, we don't normally see a game that withholds video game reviews, shows the players absolutely nothing up until about 2 weeks before the game's launch, only to have their executives quit days before the game comes out. So today, I'm going to break down the hilariously chaotic development and release of Mind's Eye. I'm going to talk about my experience playing the game and why from now on, anytime we ever hear of a game that's being made by insert your favorite game developers here, I'd run. I knew absolutely nothing about Mind's Eye until just a few weeks ago. Then I found out that it was a game being made by a 450-person studio founded back in 2017, led by Leslie Benzies, the former president of Rockstar North, and I thought, well, that's odd that I haven't heard anything about this. A Grand Theft Auto competitor supposedly in development for years, and yet I'd never seen a trailer, a reveal, or even a headline. I only came across it because of some reporting that the game's co-CEO and lead developer had gone into their community Discord to claim that Mind's Eye was being targeted, that content creators and bots were mass disliking the trailer and trying to poison the conversation around the game, and suggesting that someone was paying to sabotage it before launch. George Foster of The Gamer wrote about it in an article titled, "A Concerted Effort to Trash the Game. Mind's Eye lead thinks negative reception is coming from paid bots, seemingly blames Rockstar." They say Mind's Eye has been on a bit of a weird road ever since it was first announced, and it really wasn't helped by the lack of gameplay and information so close to release. Build a Rocket Boy tried to fix this recently with some previews from content creators and a new overview trailer, but the response hasn't been all that positive. Most of the recent showcases of Mind's Eye have been met with calls for it to be delayed due to bugs or filled with comments from people saying it looks off somehow. While it could just be because people aren't gelling with what they've seen so far, Build a Rocket Boy's co-CEO, Mark Gerhard, seems to think that the negative feedback is being paid for. As reported by Eurogamer, Gerhard took to Mind's Eye's Discord server to respond to a comment asking if he believed that all of the people who negatively reacted were financed by someone, which he agreed by saying 100%. After being called out for this, Gerhard said, "Not wild when it's true." To make matters even more interesting, Gerhard later said that it doesn't take much to guess who, which seems to be aimed at Rockstar and Take-Two, considering Mind's Eye is clearly gunning for a similar vibe to GTA and comes from a former lead on the series. That seems to be what Gerhard is hinting at, although he didn't confirm it in the Discord. It is unlikely to say exactly who he means. I'm just going to say it how it is. They made a bad trailer for a bad game. That's it. Not a conspiracy, not sabotage. They were just trying to skirt accountability as quickly as they possibly can. You put out a product that was so mid it couldn't even survive a YouTube comment section. There is no world in which Rockstar is behind this. If they actually wanted to bury Mind's Eye, you'd see a lot more than a few thousand dislikes on a YouTube trailer. We're talking about one of the richest, most influential studios on the planet. 3,000 dislikes, some shitty comments, and a couple of content creators that are unimpressed. If they were coming after you, you wouldn't be able to blame it on a bad comment section. The reality is, Mind's Eye was being criticized because nobody knew what the hell it was, and it screamed scam. That trailer was as weird as it gets. A shiny cinematic city, a weird monotone voiceover that sounded like it was AI generated, boring gameplay clips to lines like, "You have expert skills," as the character literally just stands in the middle of the road getting shot. Nothing about it inspired confidence, and somehow things only got worse from here. Just 5 days after headlines started circulating about the co-CEO accusing critics of being paid off or being paid actors, both the studio's chief legal officer and chief financial officer quit. Less than a week before launch. That is not a reshuffle, that is a lifeboat moment. That is people that are in charge of legal and financial liability saying, no thanks, we're good, and stepping off the ship before it hits the iceberg. And looking at how that game launched, yeah, I can see why. Mind's Eye debuted to just over 3,000 players on Steam with a 41% rating. It's like these guys are trying to compete with Concord. Social media has been flooded with clips of bugs, glitches, and complaints. It is so bad that Dark Viper, who covers GTA, ended up laughing during his sponsored segment while trying to tell people where to buy the game. Carnage had his entire sponsorship pulled before he could even make it to the main menu of the game.
What? Okay. The sponsor just paused the sponsored stream. So, first time that's happened.
It honestly feels like Mind's Eye entire marketing push or their marketing campaign was just canceled last minute just to stop the bleeding and avoid any further embarrassment. Though embarrassed isn't really the word that I would use. Exposed feels more accurate because I took the time to sit down and play Mind's Eye, and at first I actually didn't understand what all the complaints are about. Sure, the gameplay was simple, but I wasn't hitting any major bugs. The performance seemed relatively fine. It was pretty stable for the most part, and the voice acting was honestly solid, like genuinely great work for such terrible writing. But for the first hour, I just kind of thought to myself, okay, maybe people are overreacting. Then it struck me. The first 2 hours of this game are basically cutscenes. You are either watching characters talk or you were driving from one place to another. Sometimes you're just following another car, and it feels intentional, like they purposely front-loaded the entire experience to delay you from hitting the broken parts. That earlier section in the game is the most polished part of the entire game. The voice work is good, the driving feels smooth, the cutscenes look relatively clean, but the actual gameplay, completely non-existent. It wasn't until almost hour 2 that I was like, bro, wait a minute, when am I actually going to play this game? Instead, you get these drawn-out car chases, missions where you have to place bots on a map and then just watch them do their thing. All of this endless busy work that barely even qualifies as interaction. The longer you play, the more it starts to unravel. The cracks stop being cracks and start being the entire foundation. You hit this one chase sequence in the game, maybe an hour or an hour and a half in, and you pull out the submachine gun that you just recently used, and for whatever reason now, it has infinite ammo. The bullet effects that are coming out of it are just looping the same low-res streaking animation that looks like it was ripped out of a decade-old tech demo. The AI in this game is just god-awful. Enemies will just stand still and fire at nothing or just ignore you entirely. Civilians will do nothing at all, or sometimes they'll just trigger the exact same animation and all just start sprinting directly at you like a horror movie. I honestly couldn't bring myself to play any more of it, but everything that I have seen past then only gets worse. Scripted events where enemies will just die even if you don't even shoot at them, hallways filled with hundreds of pre-rendered enemies, and more. This game isn't just bad, it's unfinished. The more that I played, the more it reminded me of the day before more than GTA or anything even close to a polished full release, but that's exactly what they're selling it as. $60 and $30 for a premium pass. You don't put out any review copies, no gameplay. In my opinion, that's not mismanagement. It feels like these guys have been deliberately trying to avoid anyone knowing about what this game was. I mean, 4 days before this game launched, when players still hadn't known anything about how this game played, they uploaded a video on their YouTube channel titled Quality Assurance with Leslie Benzies. I'm not kidding you guys. A game that breaks down in the first hour where nothing feels finished, and they made a promo video about QA. This is amazing. And that's what makes this entire thing so hard to look away from. This isn't some tiny indie team that's trying to punch above their own weight. This is a 450-person studio and a game that has been in development for nearly 7 years, founded by one of the most influential figures in modern game design. So where did all that time and money go? How do you end up with this as a product that feels so early, so stitched together with that size of a team? Either this game went through hell behind the scenes or it was designed as a scam from day one. And when 2 C-level executives walk out days before launch, something's been wrong for a long time. I look at this game and I just don't understand why they didn't sell it as an early access title. The concept isn't bad. It's genuinely not. There are some genuinely interesting things here. I like the drone companion in the futuristic setting. The bones aren't the problem. You can see there's some ambition underneath this, but the second that you start playing it, it becomes obvious that this game wasn't ready. And even more frustrating is that they practically admitted this themselves. In the official trailer that they put out, they outlined what was basically an early access roadmap. Open world exploration, dynamic events, new features that were going to be coming on down the line. So why not just call it what it was? It feels like you got a team that set out to make a GTA competitor, but you couldn't actually meet the scale or quality. So instead, you just front-loaded a demo, dressed it up as a full release, and then just hope people wouldn't notice until it was too late. At this point, it honestly feels like the only reason that Mind's Eye launched was because the studio needed players to act as free QA and added funding. They didn't release it because it was finished. They released it because they had no other option. But instead of just being upfront about that, they packaged it like it was a full release, leaned on that Rockstar connection by spreading a rumor that they were the ones trying to take them down, and then hoped that the polish in the first 2 hours would be enough to carry it past the refund window. It's deceptive, sure, but more than anything, it's insulting. This has to stop. We can't keep doing this. Every single time a game comes out like this, it damages the entire ecosystem. Every single time that we see a game that is marketed as a fully finished and polished product, and then it comes out into the market only for us to find out that it is a barely functioning prototype, that damages player trust. It destroys it in most cases, and it has over the years because AAA publishers have basically done the same thing in some cases. People don't trust any of these trailers anymore. They don't even want to buy games on day one anymore. They're waiting. They're waiting for reviews. They're waiting for refunds. They're waiting for patches. They don't want to get burned. From my perspective, Mind's Eye isn't just a failure. It's just another log on the fire that's burning this industry right now. It's crazy because this is such a great candidate for early access. That's the one thing that just blows my mind with this. Why wouldn't you have packaged it like that? Because that's obviously what the game essentially is. You want to challenge a titan like Grand Theft Auto, you're going to need some obscene resources to be able to achieve that. You're going to need a lot of money, a lot of time. You're going to need a lot of player feedback. But they didn't go that route. No, they didn't. Instead, they wanted to charge $60, pretend like it was a fully finished game, give you a premium upgrade for $30. Disgusting. We have had so many discussions on this channel talking about indie games, and one of the things that I realized with this is one of the reasons why we give indie games more favorability is because of the fact that those games are largely marketed for what they are, and players know what they're getting into. It's not just the David versus Goliath narrative. We know what those games are. They're not being marketed as anything else. They're not trying to sell players broken promises. They're not trying to hype themselves up more than they need to. No, because they can't afford to. So they just sell it for what it is. And that's what they need to start doing with some of these games. I mean, look, Outer Worlds is going to be $80. Effectively a AA game being $80. We'll see how well that one's going to go. Now, speaking of things being what they are, this game was being sold and likely funded behind the idea that its CEO is Rockstar North's former president. And we've seen that trend. We've been seeing that trend a lot recently. How many times have you guys seen a game that's been popping up that says, oh, hey, this is made by former X and Y developers or whatever it might be, and they're selling hope that they can do better than the games that they came from. They're selling the idea that they are the ones that made those games what they are. The fact of the matter is, they aren't. I keep seeing these games that are being marketed around former X or Y game developers, and they just keep flopping. Most recently, we saw it with Concord, built by a studio that was made up of former Destiny developers. Immortals of Avium came from former Call of Duty and Dead Space developers. 2K Games Project Ethos, which is coming along. Nobody's actually interested in it. It's a Fortnite clone. That game is also being led and worked on by former Call of Duty developers, and none of these games have landed. Nobody's interested in them. The only real exception that I've seen in recent memory is Embark Studios, which is made up of former Battlefield developers from ICE, who launched The Finals, which is actually an incredible game, and now they have Arc Raiders, which is coming up, and I'm definitely excited for that. Now, I think there's a few reasons for this trend, but one of the big ones is how these studios rely on their names of their former games to be able to sell themselves. They use that association to get funding, for sure, but they also use it to build up hype. They lead with that legacy, which then creates this level of expectation that these studios can't actually meet. And 9 times out of 10, these developers are coming from games that have already lost goodwill. That makes things even worse because that player base is looking for somewhere else to go. So what ends up happening is that players who feel let down by these other franchises that these guys are coming from, they see these spin-off studios and they start getting their hopes up. And these studios know that they're getting their hopes up. That's the reason why they use their names and their legacy. It makes the players think, okay, maybe these are the people who left and they're the ones that actually understood what made the game great. Maybe they're the ones that can bring that feeling back. But most of the time it doesn't happen because these guys have set themselves up for failure. Because now they're carrying the weight of an entire franchise without the infrastructure, budget, or the team that was there to support it in the first place. And they're expected to now deliver something that's even better than it. Take XDefiant. That game was heavily marketed as being led by former Call of Duty developers, most notably Mark Rubin. That game had a lot of hype behind it, not because of what it showed off, but because of who was making it and what it could end up being. A lot of people wanted it to be the Call of Duty killer. That was the constant phrase that was passed around. And yet that game, when it launched, it was riddled with issues and it failed to meet expectations. A lot of that comes down to the brutal gap between marketing promises and what these teams can actually deliver. The pitch was always a dream, a spiritual successor, a return to form, a game for the fans. But that dream, once it actually gets put into code with all the constraints of a smaller budget, less experienced developers, and a shorter timeline, rarely holds up. And I think there's a much more practical problem here as well, which is just money. Most of these developers are leaving these massive, fully funded, well-oiled machines to go and join either brand new studios or smaller divisions inside of larger publishers. They go from having hundreds of engineers and specialists to small, scrappy teams that are trying to reinvent the wheel with fewer tools. In Rubin's case, he went from Activision, one of the most aggressively resourced publishers in the entire world, to Ubisoft, which, despite its major name, simply does not have the same financial firepower to be able to throw at a single shooter. Rubin himself has been transparent about this. He admitted that XDefiant's biggest hurdles and the reason why the game failed wasn't because of their vision or ambition, it was their manpower, technical limitations, and lack of marketing muscle. All things that would have never been a problem if he was at Activision. When I look at Mind's Eye or any of these other games, the pattern becomes pretty clear because none of these guys were ever built to be one-man shows. That guy from Rockstar, Leslie Benzies, he isn't some solo genius that could just will a Grand Theft Auto competitor into existence. He came from one of the most well-funded, well-connected studios in the entire industry, a company that makes one of the most profitable games in the history of the hobby with virtually unlimited resources and the backing of Take-Two Interactive. Strip all that away, and it turns out Prestige doesn't build games, teams do. We've seen this happen over and over again. Talented developers leave a big name studio, start something new, and they just can't replicate what they were once a part of. Not because they're frauds or incapable, but because game development is creative, collaborative, and incredibly messy. It's like being in a band. You can have a great drummer or a killer guitarist, but the minute that band breaks up, the magic doesn't always carry over to the next one. Sometimes it was the combination of things that made things work. And in game development, there are a very few amount of Dave Grohls that are out there who can walk from one legendary project and then just go build another one from scratch. I think the worst part of this trend is actually the financial side of it because it works against everybody. When somebody like Leslie Benzies starts a studio, it's not just going to be the name that attracts the funding, it's also going to be the pitch. Former Rockstar president making a turn-based fantasy RPG, they're just going to sleep. But former Rockstar president making a Grand Theft Auto competitor, that's not just interesting, that is irresistible. Because if you're an investor and you hear those words in the same sentence, your mind immediately goes to making billions of dollars. Keep in mind, Grand Theft Auto V didn't just sell well, it became one of the most profitable pieces of entertainment in history. So when somebody tied to that success says that they want to take a shot at the throne, well, people are going to start lining up to throw money at it. $200 million starts to sound like a reasonable investment if there's a slim chance of being able to pull off something that even lives in the same orbit. But the problem is, and I think we can really see this with Mind's Eye, is that kind of pitch then locks you into a very narrow outcome. Now that game has to look like a blockbuster. It has to be competitive with one of the biggest franchises in the world, or at least look convincing enough to appear like it could be. That's where the pressure starts to twist the entire development process, because now you've taken hundreds of millions of dollars in funding based on the promise of this being the next GTA or something like it, and there's no walking back from that. You can't pivot. You can't downscope that game. You've already sold the dream, and people backing you aren't expecting a respectable AA hit. They're expecting a cultural phenomenon. That financial pressure, as well as the expectations that they built up over time, doesn't just shape the marketing, it starts to shape the game itself, because now the most important thing to these guys isn't how the game plays or whether or not it's even remotely ready for launch. It's about how it looks. It needs to look expensive. It needs to look next gen. You start chasing spectacle over systems, and graphics take a priority over gameplay. Fidelity takes a priority over function. You're not building a game anymore. You're starting to build a trailer, something that you can chop up into 90-second montages that look just convincing enough to pass as a blockbuster in the making. And this is where things really fall apart, especially for a game like Mind's Eye, because those visual benchmarks eat up massive amounts of time and money. You spend years polishing cityscapes, cinematic lighting, detailed facial rigs, while the mechanics go completely untouched. Core systems get underdeveloped, bugs end up piling up, and gameplay loops remain shallow because nobody has had the time or resources to be able to even try to refine them. The visuals will sell a fantasy, but the game underneath it doesn't actually work, and you're in too deep to be able to even try to fix it. So instead of pulling back and showing where things are actually at, these studios, like with Mind's Eye, will just double down. They'll withhold gameplay, they'll avoid transparency, they'll rehearse every single preview, carefully select every single asset, and stall on open communication, because the moment that people start to see the cracks, the entire illusion breaks. And once you understand how these financial pressures, as well as these expectations, start to shape their development, it stops looking like incompetence and it starts looking like an inevitability. These games aren't just broken, they're built on the wrong priorities, not because the developers didn't care, but because they were never building for the players in the first place. They were building for investors and hoping the rest of it would just sort itself out later. And I think that's the most damning part and likely the cause of most of their issues, because with a lot of these games that we would like to refer to as investor-led, and you guys know exactly what kind of games that I'm talking about, more times than not, they're actually coming from already established studios or publishers, and usually from franchises that are already recognizable to begin with. So they already have a player base to be able to fall back on. They already have some revenue that's likely coming in. And also on top of that, they likely also have a little bit of greatness that's still tucked away, at least in the original concept. But with these new studios, like we see with Mind's Eye, led by former prestigious developers, they just become a microcosm for the best example of what happens when you're not making a game for the players, and instead the entire project is based around your investors or being able to get funding or whatever else it might be. I mean, I was looking through the history of the company, and they were hiring blockchain guys, and there were some rumblings in the background, a couple of articles that I'd read where they had talked about how this game and likely another game were meant to be either NFT or crypto games, which they obviously backed off from. But the problem is with stuff like that, it's a cancer. It's already tainted the studio. It's already tainted the games, and those games always fail. They're always a problem. And even if you take that element out, the remnants are still there because you started that project for all the wrong reasons. I said this a long time ago. You can't say NFT game without saying NFT first. And that's the first thing that comes to mind when they're making those games, not you. You know, made by former X or Y developer is just such a red flag now. And I didn't realize it until I started making this video, because it is all based on investor funding. If you take a minute to think about it, all they are doing is selling you the idea, as well as the investor, that they're going to make a game better than the game that they came from. And that's what everybody is hoping every single time that this goes on. I mean, look at some of the names that we constantly see used. Destiny, Call of Duty, Blizzard, BioWare. It's all former developers from studios that have already burned their audiences, so they know that the players are hungry for something else. But those studios have also made oodles of money off of the franchises that these guys are coming from. So either you have investors that are like, oh, we're about to hit it big right now. They're about to make the next Fortnite. They're about to make the next Call of Duty. They're about to make the next Grand Theft Auto. It's tantalizing for players and it's tantalizing for investors, but it's all selling a lie every single time. I guess not every single time, but pretty much every single time. There's no future for this game. I want to make that clear. There's zero future for this game. I saw a couple people that were talking about No Man's Sky or Cyberpunk 2077, but the problem is a lot of people don't realize those games had a few things that this game doesn't have, which is one, hype. This game had no hype. It walked out of the gate and absolutely flopped. Two, it doesn't have any money. Those games already had people's money. So there was a reason for them to improve those games. There was a reason for them to try to repair their reputation, because either they were a studio that was just starting out or had, somewhat of a good reputation, or they just wanted to make good. Like No Man's Sky was just quite literally, we just wanted to make a good game, but just didn't have the time to. Cyberpunk was more of, repairing their reputation for the future more than anything else. But, seeing those executives leave, I'm telling you right now, I give this studio maybe a couple months, couple weeks. That's probably about it. This game is cooked. This is a bad one. Anyway, hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you guys did enjoy the video, subscribe to the channel, like the video, share the video, follow me on Twitter. Follow me on, why did I say it like that? Follow me on Twitch. I'll catch you guys in the next one. Stay cool, stay righteous, stay safe. Catch you in the next. Peace.
Family, 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 family.